we're really looking to get into is sort of advocacy to get the sort of conflicts of interest out of medicine. Having been in medicine, I realized that there's actually all these problems. Like, there's not just pharmaceuticals, but the research. So we all pretend we live in this world of evidence-based medicine. The problem is, if all the evidence is corrupt, then evidence-based medicine is also going to be corrupt. So if all your evidence is produced by pharmaceuticals, is produced by people getting paid by the sugar industry, for example, well, you're going to think sugar's fine. And we have studies that prove that funded studies, so if you fund a study, then you're like something like 6 to 10 times more likely to find a result favoring your sponsor. Well, that's just human nature. So we have a guy in Toronto, a Dr. Stephen Piper, who is out there all the time saying sugar's good, fructose is good, it's like a health food. I'm like, okay, that's really dumb. That's what I'm thinking. And then, of course, in the newspaper, in the National Post last year, which is our national newspaper, it's like, oh yeah, he takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from the sugar industry, Coca-Cola and everybody. I'm like, okay.
Makes sense.
Well, this makes total sense. And here's the sugar industry funding the University of Toronto, which is happily taking all this cash, they're taking all this money, and producing shoddy research. And it's like, I don't blame the sugar company. The sugar company, or the pharmaceutical, or the big food company, I don't blame them at all. Because their responsibility is to sell sugary beverage. That's their responsibility to their company, to their shareholders. That's their whole goal. Yeah. It's out there. Coke is there to sell Coke. That's its job. The problem is that we allow Coke to pay the University of Toronto millions of dollars to produce crappy research. Why do we allow that? If you give a New York City policeman a cold drink, he could get fired because it's a conflict of interest. If you give a judge sort of a slice of pizza, he or she could get fired for taking that slice of pizza. And we all say, of course, you can't bribe a judge, whether it's a slice of pizza or a car. It's the same principle.
The reciprocity.
Exactly. Because when I give you something, you're going to feel better towards me. That's all human nature. So we say, okay, I understand this. Everybody understands this. So therefore, nobody is allowed to give policemen, nobody's allowed to give judges anything. But we say, oh yeah, but if you're a big company, you can give doctors however much money you want. So you look at a journal like the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and the editors, which decide which journals get published, what everything is, on average, they're taking each over $400,000 a year from companies. And it's like, okay, I don't blame the company. The company, if it means selling more stuff, that's what they should be doing. The question is, why do we allow that to happen when it doesn't apply to anybody else? You can't give $400,000 to a New York Times journalist. They will get fired by the New York Times. They will absolutely get fired. You can't go to some company, all big companies have this rule. I can't go to the bank manager and say, oh, hey, here's $10,000. You're going to give me a loan, right? He's going to get fired or she's going to get fired. Everywhere we know this, we put rules on it, but yet when it comes to our health, we say, hey, Dr. Stephen Piper, you can take, here's $500,000. Just do some research on why sugar's good for you. And he produces it, and then people come out and say, well, the evidence says that sugar's good for us. It's like, isn't that the most ridiculous situation you've ever heard? This is one of the things that really has to get out there, because if you have differences of opinion between scientists, that's fine. That's how science works. Everybody has a different opinion. I don't mind. That's the vegans have a different opinion than I do. That's fine. The problem is when you get all these sort of commercial interests in it. But it's not a problem for the commercial interests. I mean, the drug companies, they're allowed to do it, so they should do it, and they will do it because that's what their stated goal is. Their stated goal is to sell more drug.
Right.
what we have to do is we have to be on our, political, we have to get political and really say, okay, we shouldn't be allowing any of this. Anybody who teaches students, medical students, teaches at the university, is not allowed to take money. Like,
seems like a no-brainer.
That's like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
They take hundreds of thousands of dollars, every single one of them.
Wow.
These programs, like the pharmaceuticals put out, they pay a doctor $1,500 to give an hour-long talk. Lots of doctors do it. Mm-hmm. The more prominent, the more money they get. They pay editors of large journals like hundreds of thousands of dollars each to get their research into it. The studies are all produced by drug companies, and we know that if that's the case, then it's far more likely to be biased. And the whole thing. And people complain about, it's big sugar and big tobacco and big meat. It's like, that's the first thing we should be doing, is saying we need new rules. Nobody's allowed to pay university professors any kind of money. You want to be a university professor, you want the privilege of teaching medical students, you get paid by the university. You don't get paid by anybody else. If you want to write guidelines, clinical guidelines for diabetes, clinical guidelines for dietary guidelines, whatever it is, anybody who writes any kind of guideline is not allowed to take money from anybody. Because doctors are the worst, because they take lots of money from everybody, and they think that just disclosing it is fine. It's like, I don't care if you say it, don't do it. Mm-hmm. You don't have a judge out there saying, oh yeah, I've been paid by this, and that. So you go to these lectures, and they're terrible because we have financial disclosure slides, and so anytime you go to any lecture, somebody will flash up a slide, and there's like 15 drug companies on it that he's been paid by. Mm-hmm. And he goes, and he'll always say something like, I'm not biased because I'm paid by everybody. And everybody laughs. I'm thinking, oh my God.
Yeah.
You guys don't even know how crooked the whole situation is, because in any other sphere of life, it would be completely unacceptable. Would it be acceptable for your child's teacher to be getting money from
who knows
Coca-Cola?
What? Yeah. No, I agree.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely 100% not. You would never stand for it. I would never stand for it. If I knew my teacher, my child's teacher, was being paid by Coke, and hey, teaches them that Coke is okay. But yet, Coke can pay Dr. Stephen Piper lots of money to come out and say, hey, sugar's good for you. Then he teaches the medical students, hey, sugar's good for you. Which teaches you that sugar is good for you. And then you get diabetes and die. It's like, that's very wrong. There's something very wrong there. And that's one of the things that we really have to get the rules changed. Not because they're stricter than anybody else. We need the same rules as everybody else. And the health of the sort of whole nation sort of depends on it. We have so many of these researchers that are just on the payroll. It's like, oh,
publishing biased. So it's kind of a parting note here. How do you look at research then now to try and look at it more objectively with the idea that this could be funded in a different way?
Yeah, it's really hard. That's why most people who have understand evidence-based medicine think it's completely crap. So there's guys like there's a former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet. These are the two sort of most prominent medical journals in the world, who have both said, yeah, after like 20 years of being in the business, I realized that it's all crap.
Yeah.
Most of what we publish is not true. There's this replication bias, where people try and juice up their findings so that it gets in the newspapers, and then when they try and replicate the study, it's like, oh, it wasn't true at all. They only got the result because they were trying to find a result to get in the newspaper, sort of thing. So anybody who actually understands evidence-based medicine, so these are the sort of the editors-in-chief, the guys who have been there and done that and lived that life. they've all basically turned their back and said it's all just crap now. And it's not that the idea is bad. It's a good idea. But what you have to do is say, get all the commercial interests out of science. You can't have a drug company doing a study on their own drug and saying, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Everybody should do it, and anybody who doesn't do it is some Luddite who doesn't understand evidence-based medicine. It's like, okay, but there's something really wrong here. If the heroin company is saying, look at this study, heroin benefits everybody, and came out and taught the doctors and gave doctors hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach medical students that heroin's good for you, we'd say, buddy, that study was funded by the heroin company, you can't trust it. But when we say, oh, that study was funded by the drug company, we're like, yay. It's like logic is just like, I'm like kind of appalled, sort of, with how everything is developed in medicine, in that logic seems to sort of play no role in what we do. That is, you can't allow drug companies to do their own study and then tout their own horn and then dictate how we do medicine.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like, you've given it up. And why? Because our leaders, our university professors, are all on the payroll.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's a great book about biases, Decisive, by the Heath brothers, Dan and Chip Heath. Oh, okay. And so I just noticed that as someone who's been the beneficiary of fasting and the ketogenic diet, I'm very biased, pro that. But now when I read research, I try and really be aware of that, because you find yourself seeking out more of the same. Yeah. And so human nature, we're very, very biased creatures. So you can see how this could happen. But if in terms of like kind of a parting piece of advice, like the biggest health issue, do you think that's one of them, that so-called evidence-based medicine is really industry funded? And
yeah, I think that there's sort of a couple of things. I mean, there's from a health standpoint, honestly, it's metabolic syndrome, obesity, type 2 diabetes. That's clearly going to be the issue of our times.
Yeah.
It's killing tons of people. Cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer. Those are the biggest sort of 3 killers of Americans, and they're all sort of metabolic problems. So that's sort of the biggest problem, and going to the sort of standard medical dogma is not great for the related issue of a lot of bias in medicine research. The good news is that you can take control of your own health, through understanding like what we're talking about, do the cutting out processed foods, reducing the number of times that you eat, intermittent fasting, and sort of regain sort of 90% of your health. So from the good news from a patient perspective is that yes, you can do something about it right now. The larger societal issue is exactly that, to get the bias out of medical science, because the reason that medical science is hopelessly bad is that there's just too much bias. So if you look back at the 1970s, obesity goes from very little to very high. So we're worse than we were in 1970.
Yeah.
If you look at technology, in the 1970s, computer is like the size of this room. It has like, a tenth of the computing power of my iPhone. It's like, that's the power of human ingenuity. In nutrition, we've gone backwards. We would have gone from a computer the size of this room to a computer the size of this entire complex.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And it's because there's too much bias. We get people saying that sugar is good for you. I mean, tobacco is the same thing. For years, people said, no problem, no problem. Why? They're all on the payroll. Okay, so we understand that for tobacco. Why don't we understand it for drug companies, for this and that? And again, it's not that I'm anti-drug companies. Drug companies have a very valuable role, but they need to be sort of over there, and the university has to be over here, and you have to split them. And if their drug is good, then the university will say, okay, well, your drug is good. But at least I know that you're not paying the guy who's saying it's good.
Yeah.